Hi, welcome to the May 21st, 2021 Club Cubase live stream. I'm going to do a quick audio test and we'll get started here in just a moment. Turn my phone volume down. And do a quick audio test, make sure everything is coming through. Okay, everything is sounding fine. My name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host for the live stream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you could go to the live chat field and ask questions in real time, or you could submit questions in advance to clubcubase at steinberg.de. And we will try to go for probably about 4 hours today. We'll go through the questions chronologically as asked. Periodically, I may lose a question as my chat field is behind the live chats, so I can keep track of questions. As we do that, if I accidentally, if because my ability to answer the questions is far slower than the ability of people to ask questions, if we could try to avoid, we'll try to go through the list chronologically. So if we could try to avoid asking the same question repeatedly, if you don't get an immediate response, that would be appreciated. When you ask questions, if we could also indicate which version of Cubase, if it's Cubase 10.5 Pro on Windows 10 or Cubase 11 Elements on Mac OS Big Sur, that information is helpful. So we'll try to go through each of the questions chronologically. If for some reason I accidentally skip your question, you can feel free to ask that. If you saw that I answered a question before yours and after yours, we would try not to edit any questions. We try to go through all of the different questions that we have. But if I inadvertently skip one, or if we lose it during the sometimes when the chat field is refreshing, I'll apologize in advance for that. Like many of you during kind of COVID era, my family is at home, so my son may interrupt. My wife is working directly above me, so I'll apologize for any interruptions in advance. And if you are watching the live stream, you can please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. Also, if you want to, if this is your first live stream, if you want to just say hello, let us know it's your first live stream. It's always great to see people joining from all over the world. The live streams will be available to watch afterwards. A few hours after the live stream, we will see all the topics covered with timestamps in the live stream in the first field of the comments. So you could navigate to that. If you want to check for any topics that have been covered, and I was just kind of doing my spreadsheet on our live streams, and since the pandemic started, we were over 10,100 questions during the live streams. But if you have any particular questions, you could also, if you want to see if it's been covered in this live stream or previous, you could go to Jan of Stockholm, who has created the CubaseIndex.com website, so you could search there. Also, I want to thank Agent K in advance, because he usually does some moderation for us when needed. We usually have a very well-behaved group, and we appreciate that. And another wonderful resource of Steinberg information would be not only the Steinberg official YouTube channels, like this one that we're on now, but also you could check out the Cubase Nation Discord, and Jazz Dude, who's usually on the live streams, does a lot to make that happen. So we appreciate all the support, and also support from all the wonderful attendees as well. So we'll go ahead and get started in a minute. We're going to let some people get logged in, and we will get started. And if you're watching this after the live stream, you don't have to introduce yourself. You're more than welcome to in the comments field. But we'll wait just maybe another minute and go ahead and get started. So, all right. So we'll go get started now. So All right, so we have a question from Michaels. Hi, Greg. Hope all is well. Is there a way in a piano roll to fold the roll to show only the notes in a particular key? Kind of like the drum editor when you show only notes with drum sounds being used. Okay, so let's say if I'm in this particular key here, I'm in the key of A flat, and if I only wanted to filter, and this is new in version 11, in conjunction with this scale assistant, so we could do it from this particular view, or we could just go to like the full screen view. At this point, we could say I want my editor key to be, I think we're in A flat or G sharp and harmonic major. So at this point, when we go to the very top here, so once we defined our key, and we could actually derive that from the chord track if you're using it, but you could say show only pitches that have events, or you could say show pitches from the scale assistant. And then once you have the scale assistant, you're only going to see the particular pitches for the scale that's been defined here. So go up to the top, and this is in version 11. And then you could filter out different. So if you only want to see notes that have events, notes within the scale, so that every note you draw in could be in the key, or if you wanted to see all the pitches available. So enable this icon at the top after defining the key, and then choose show pitches from scale assistant. And then it's only going to show you the pitches from the scale that you've defined. Okay, so we have Carlos checking in from Colombia, Uno from Finland. Okay, so we see Ace Amadeus. I believe he's in Texas. All right. So Cubase, so Ace's question, Cubase 10.5 in final mastering stage. What are the best plugins to use, and what order should they be placed in? And which ones control loudness distortion? So if you have a 2-channel mix and you're ready to kind of apply kind of mastering processes, there's no real set order. So it could, whatever works for the particular project. A lot of people may start off with a little bit, and there's always different discussions of, applying a global EQ or global compressor, like a mixed bus EQ or compressor, which should come first. There's different schools of thought. Just try it out because you could swap the order easily. So some of the plugins that I would do in kind of a mastering scenario, I would, definitely for kind of very surgical filtering and EQs, I would use frequency. And this is going to allow you to not only to adjust, 8 bands with linear phase, but you could pick and choose whether you want that band to be stereo, independent left, right, or mid-side. So that gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. If you're looking to add more gain, I would check out the multi-band compressor. So this would allow you to compress individual frequency ranges. Some other variations on some multi-band plugins that are really nice. I would check out the Imager, because this way you could make certain frequency groups wider or make the low end more narrow. And I always like the maximizer. So under dynamics, you could do the maximizer, and that could give you some of the extra gain, or going directly into something like your brick wall limiter, and you could get additional gain using those particular plugins. So between those 5 plugins, you should be able to get like a really beefed up final mastered, adding that final master, adding that polish to your final project sound. All right, so we have David checking in from Liverpool, and John Costigan from a steamy Kenosha, Wisconsin. Filter Freak from South UK. All right, so we see Jazz Dude from Germany. All right, so we have Christian D68 from France, Alsace. I probably said that wrong. All right, so Tim Weinheimer. Okay, so we have from Filter Freak. Hi, Greg. Could you check supervision LUFs with control room LUFs to see if they are on the same readout? Supervision on control room main inserts. So let's go ahead and I will just set up a quick project where we know kind of what the level is. We could try. We'll start off with this project here. So. So let's say if I go to my meter, I'll open up my control room meter here. So let's say we'll go to, so we'll have our loudness meter here. And then as an insert, I have supervision. And I'll just do a new instance of it, so we could just add. Now, something to be aware of when you're using these is that each of these can have different settings. So right now you can see, okay, I'm going to do, my stereo bus settings. But when we go into some of the settings here, so let's go click on the settings cogwheel. You can make sure that you have like your reference level for like the integrated reference. And you could do this here. But they look like they're kind of matching up. But make sure that these values between the two are consistent. So if you're seeing inconsistency, it could be because you could have this work for like -23 or -14, depending upon whatever value that you have chosen and what your delivery format is for. Okay, so we have, I see Michael Pierce on the live stream. So Michael had asked a question last week about trying to get the F11 key to come back. So I looked it up for Michael. So if we go to your system preferences to keyboard, so on Mac OS, your F11 key can be kind of hijacked. So if we come over here to shortcuts under keyboard, we can see that show desktop is with F11. So I'm going to try to uncheck that. So we go to under your preferences to shortcuts to mission control and show desktop with F11. So now if I do this and hit F11, we should see our VST instrument rack. So even if we do the intuitive aspect of the system preferences and choose to use F1, F2 keys, we need to go into shortcuts, into into mission control, and you need to disable because macOS still hijacks those function keys. So give that a shot, Michael Pearson, and hopefully you will have access to your instrument rack for you. All right, so we have Luthier checking in from Atlantic City. All right, and we have Peter from Portland, Maine. Michael Pierce wants everyone to hit to slap the like button. Okay. Okay, so we see Trond Andreas or Andreas checking in from Norway. Thanks for joining us. Okay, sorry, my chat field just jumped on me. Okay, so question, how complex is video in Cubase? I would like to create a split screen guitar lesson. with eventually having them fully synced for playback. Never ever tried, sorry. So, once you have a project, you could, it's not intended to be like a video editor, but you could have if you right click, you could add a video track. And really the intention is to take, if we wanted to like import a video file, to be able to, replace audio or score to that particular file. So you could have the video, in the project. You could hit F, we could automatically extract the audio from the video. And then if we just hit F8, that will allow us to see the video window directly in the project. So I'm not sure, you could double click or right click and choose to go to full screen mode and double click to get out of that. So, but it's not really intended to, you could have like if you're like for a guitar part, if you wanted to have the guitar that's recorded and have the video be, I think it's going to keep its aspect ratio here. So, if you wanted to do something like that, but it's not going to export, it'll export the audio directly into the video, but it's not going to capture like the Cubase screen if that's needed for your video application. Okay, let's move on to see. So Michael Pierce saying the best sessions are when Greg's son interrupts. So he's he's kind of back in school for 4 days a week, so for a couple more weeks. So and usually when he comes home, he's out playing with some of his friends. So he hasn't interrupted as frequently lately. So he's kind of back to school a bit. Okay, so I just see from Soren in Sweden says, I'm remote controlling a friend's computer now and installing just purchased Cubase Elements 11. So thanks for letting me know. I hope that information was helpful, that we passed on for the dealer in Sweden. And thanks to my colleagues at Steinberg for passing on the information. All right, so we see James from Pylon Records. Okay. We have Scott Davies checking in, Taylor Sapp from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania, Terry Gray from Minnesota. All right, Jeff Sabelski from Chico, California, and also Stefan from Sweden. Okay, so a question from... Let me adjust my chair, sorry. Question from Taylor. When I switched to Cubase 11 on new Windows 10 computer, I no longer see my hardware connections for my UR44. How do I get them back? So make sure, especially if it's on a new computer, that you go to your studio setup, select the audio system, and make sure that you have the UR44 selected here. Once you have the UR44, I have a UR24. It's the interface that I use for my live streams. And then when you go to F4, at this point, you could see all the available inputs and outputs of your audio interface available for mapping. But usually by default, it may not. It may take you to a generic low latency driver on a new installation until you tell Cubase to use a particular audio interface like your UR44 in the studio setup menu. Okay, so we see from Jay from Connecticut, I'm just getting into synths and looking for a consistent interface. Does Halion have any synths which can both be used as instrument and FX, not samples, but audio channels? So the Halion, it does, multiple forms of synthesis. It can do wavetable, organ oscillators, virtual analog, as well as combining that with samples. And there will be effects in there. The effects are often going to be scaled down versions or very similar to the built-in effects that you have in Cubase. So you'll have a convolution reverb as a part of Hallian, and that's derived from Reverence. You'll have, different, EQs, compressors. So you have some of the Cubase effects plugins integrated directly into Hallian, but the effects that are in Hallian are internal for Hallian instruments and processing and mixing. And the effects in Hallian aren't going to be used outside. But again, most of the effects are already that Hallian uses are derived from the Cubase internal effects. Okay, so we see a question from Taylor. Direct monitoring sounds the same whether track is in monitor mode or not. Is this normal? So it could be normal, and it could be depending on especially the audio interface settings, because especially with the Steinberg UR44, that could be functioning, as a standalone mixer. So make sure that you have the UR44 is chosen here, and that can make a difference because you could, alter the direct monitoring once you see that. And once you have the UR44, I think under more options, you may see like your audio settings set up, and there's some additional settings in there that could affect direct monitoring. Okay, we have a question. Is there a way to color the different notes in the piano roll? For instance, I'd like to color the bass notes one color and the chords a different color. So I don't think we could set, but let's go ahead and take a quick look. So let's say, there are different coloring schemes. So there isn't necessarily a specific color tool, for MIDI. So, what you could do, there are, the different color schemes that you can have. When you kind of go to look at it, you could, the default is going to be based on velocity. We could also see based on pitch, on the MIDI channel itself, on a part, voice, if it's going to be in and out of scales. But I don't think there's anything that would say, these notes, color. But let me try maybe with a project logical editor and see if we could maybe do something there. So it's, okay, so let's say if I select this and go to the project logical editor, I've never tried this. I'm inclined to think that it won't work. But let's say if I wanted to transform, we're going to say media type is equal to MIDI. And we're going to say, let me just check, see if container type might be more. Okay, so say MIDI is going to be equal to MIDI. Okay, so, and let's say property is set to event is selected. And this could be at the event level as opposed to the note level. And we're going to say set color to fixed value. So let's say now I want to do that. Let's So I think this will do it for the event, but not the MIDI data there. So I don't know of a way to do that, to say low notes this. If you have multiple parts selected, you could do that. Let me take one more look and say if we go to our color scheme, if they're on different MIDI channels, you could, change. So let's say if I come here and I move all of these notes to MIDI channel 2, that, I could, so say I wanted to come here. So if I put them on different MIDI channels, I could see that, but that may not be as practical. So, but there isn't a way, in one of the settings to kind of colorize based upon, like below this note a certain color, but I can see where that could be useful. Okay, question from Taylor. In Media Bay, floating window only option is all media. Right zone window has MIDI loop option, but no MIDI loops when selected. Blank screen. Where did they go? All right, so let's say if we want to find MIDI loops. So I think generally, so let's say if we go into like our loops and samples, and let's say I want to go here, and we could say our media types, all media types, and then I'll just uncheck and say I only want to see MIDI loops. So it could be that the folder that you're in may not have MIDI loops. So if we just go to the folder, so let's say if I go to Soul Assembly, we don't see any MIDI loops there. Let's see if we go to so if I go to production grooves, we can see MIDI loops. But once you have that particular folder selected, because here you're going to go into loops and samples, you could select and then choose, whether you want it to be all media types, or if you click there, you could just say now MIDI loops. And then you could go and say, okay, I'm looking for MIDI loops in this folder. And a lot of the folders may not have MIDI loops. But if we look at, let's say progressive, let's just production groove. So here are MIDI loops as well. So just where you see this little icon here, that's where you could show and filter out different types of media. So make sure that you have MIDI loops there and a folder that has, so you could always check like the SQL content, or as we're in production grooves, and you should be able to find some MIDI loops in there. Okay, so we have Stefan checking in from Sweden. Okay, so a question from Pylon Records. Greg, been digging the sampler track for weeks now. Is there a hardware controller you could recommend to access the parameters quickly in sampler track? The mousing is way too much, need knobs. All right, so let's say if we wanted to come over here and just... All right, so create a sampler track from that. All right, so we go to our sampler track, and you could always have quick controls. So in this way, we could, assign the different parameters to quick controls. So now I could adjust the level, and so your different parameters you could adjust here. And if you wanted to set these up for quick controls, you could just say, okay, I wanted to add, pitch fine to slot 6. So now I could have my pitch fine defined as just a quick control right here. So we could just use, these particular parameters from your quick controls. And if you find that you need more than 8 at a time, is you could, save that whatever configuration you want as a preset, and then come over here, save it as a preset, call up another one, and then you could have all of your sampler tracks, your quick control mappings, and have that done quickly. And that way you could kind of drive it in a very creative way using kind of more tactile control. All right, wonderful to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas, and now he's going to start giving ice cream to everyone. All right, we see Captenergy Music from outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. One quick note, next Friday, I think, is our last meeting, our last live stream of the month. So the last 2 hours of next Friday's meeting will be for the the Zoom meetup. So if you wanted to actually meet people and actually talk to each other, so I'm not the only one talking, we'll be doing that next Friday starting at 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern. So the last 2 hours of the 4-hour live stream, we'll be doing our Zoom meetup, and you could send me an email at clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I'll be happy to share the Zoom meeting info, and we'll post it in next Friday's live stream as well. Okay, we have a question. Can you tell us the difference between input channel and audio channel? So when we look at a project, we'll start a new project. Our input channels are going to be configured by our inputs in our audio connection. So often we could have our inputs that we can map to physical inputs of our audio interface. So if I have an audio interface with 8 analog ins, 8 digital ins via ADAT, I could configure those 16 inputs in whatever configuration I want. Now, as I add audio tracks, so right now, if I go to look, before I add any tracks, if I go to my mix console, I could see these input channels. Now, these aren't assigned to hold any parts, any audio. If we wanted to have a track that would play back audio, that's when we would add an audio track. So I'll add 8 audio tracks here, and we'll see that these will be different colors. So we could have our input channels and our audio channels. So the audio channels is where files are going to be stored, where they play back from, where they get processed. So a lot of times people, may not even look at the input channels. They just kind of will come here, select a channel, choose what physical input that's been defined, again, in their inputs of their audio connections, and record. Where people can get creative with input channels is, let's say you wanted to record through a plugin, or you wanted to record and embed and change and permanently apply, let's say, a plugin to the signal. So if we have a guitar player that's coming over, I could say, okay, I want to have the VST amp rack found under distortion. So I will select that. And if that's on an input channel, what we could do is whatever input, whatever channel here that this is the input for, that will record that guitar amp, and that could be burned permanently and applied to the file as it's being recorded. So we think of the audio channels as being, where the audio lives, and this is the physical input. So if you wanted to add more gain or cut gain, and I've had to do live concerts, like I did the first Eric Clapton's Crossroads, and I got to sit for, 13 hours at the front of house console in this tiny little, almost like a jail. And inevitably, as the bands were getting very, very louder over the day, it was like a festival concert, and I got to record Eric Clapton, so that didn't suck. But as the bands would creep up in volume, my signal was also being broadcast on Sirius satellite radio. So I would, as the bands were being recorded and the level was getting louder and louder as the day go on, I could just take the input channels and I would, between songs ever so slightly bring the input gain down. So if you need to add gain or cut gain, you could also use the input channels to kind of attenuate where maybe you don't have a physical knob to control volume. So you could, like during recording, you could adjust the input level here, and it's a digital level that's very clean. So those are some of the differences between the input channels, again, where we're just maybe applying processing or adjusting gain, to an audio channel where the audio lives and can be edited from. See, from Michael Pierce said he really likes the Beatles and Stones track. So I gave my friend Vince Melmed a call just to let him know that people liked his track a lot, and he was very grateful to hear that from people. So I'll invite him to the Zoom session next week. I'm not sure if he'll be available, but we'll make sure to invite him. Okay, sorry, my chat field just jumped on me. Let me find my spot. Okay, so we see Michael Pierce he missed the F11 setting just like I did. So it's not the most obvious thing, and it seems to kind of it seems to kind of contradict what the other preference was doing on the Mac OS. Okay. Okay, we have a question. Hello, Greg. Greetings from Poland. Welcome to the live stream. I'm on Cubase 11 Pro. Is there a way to use instrument snapshots available under VST media as a track picture? So when we take a snapshot, let's take a look. So if I go to add an instrument track, and I had to answer this question, I think, for Hans Zimmer's crowd, something similar. So let's say I have this. And so if I wanted to apply the snapshot, I click on the add VST plugin picture. And I believe it's going to go to, and this could be, I don't know exactly. It's just going to go into kind of the generic pictures folder. So let's say if I wanted to, okay, let me just see if I can find a location, but it just kind of stores it like in. But I think it just kind of stores it in the pictures folder. But I think if you just look in the generic kind of pictures folder, that's where you could find. Let me see if I could just find it another way. So I'm going to go to my user account. And I think maybe under pictures. So I think it goes to just kind of, if you want to email me, I could get you the exact location, but it's kind of the snapshot pictures that you take will be just stored as a graphics file. And I think it's stored like in a generic pictures folder location. I could look it up and spend a little more time with it after. If you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. And because it's just a picture file, you should be able to use it for anything. Okay, we have a question. Can you record to video as the video being the track? So Cubase doesn't allow you to record video, but it will allow you to take the audio, it will allow you to import in video file and replace all of the audio within the video file from your virtual instruments or from your audio files. And I'll also just kind of follow up to that. It says instead of tracks, stack the videos. So it doesn't really do that. Okay. Okay, question. Is it possible to save Cubase Nuendo projects into Pro Tools format for mix engineer who uses Pro Tools? So nothing could really save into Pro Tools format, just like things can't save into Cubase format. What you can do is if you have a project, so let's just jump back. Here is make stems. So if someone isn't smart enough to be running Cubase or Nuendo yet, what you could do is go to your file to export audio mixdown. And you want to just select multiple. And at this point, you could say, okay, I wanted to give them like a stereo mix roughly. I wanted to include my group channels to have those rendered, my effects channels rendered, my instrument tracks rendered, my audio tracks rendered. And we could choose to, if you wanted to include the processing, if you wanted to be completely dry, if you wanted to include your inserts and channel strip and EQ, if you wanted to include the sends or the master, you could apply those different processes. And what this will do is basically take each of these files and make equal length audio files so that, they basically, Homer Simpson can import them into any other program that can play multiple audio files. So you would just make stems and pass over the stems so that, everything starts at the same point in time. They all end at the same point in time. And you could set the length of time just by coming over here and just setting the left and right locators. And at that point, you could choose a folder where those files will be saved to, and that way you could pass them off to someone utilizing a different program. Okay, question. Do you know if there's a way to use third-party plugins applied to only mid or side? I think I used a similar feature in Wavelab demo and wondering if it was possible in Cubase. So Wavelab does have a function where you could take the plugin and do the processing, on left, right, mid, side. That functionality isn't in Cubase. But a lot of the plugins will have that capability. So, depending like where it could be applicable for a particular plugin, and it makes sense in Wavelab because it's more of a mastering environment, but like if you wanted to activate the frequency EQ at this point, you could choose, if you wanted the band to be left, right, independent, stereo, or mid side. So a lot of plugins, especially a lot of third-party plugins, will give you that option within the plugin itself. Okay, so wonderful to see Robbie Bowling from Dallas, and he says there's a major power outage on Tuesday. He says been out doing yard work. So sorry you had to do yard work. That's usually no fun. All right, but hope you're doing well, Robbie. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so Michael Teams wants people to whack the like button, and he says he'll give free ice cream, so you can't go wrong. Okay, we have a question. When I open Cubase 11 Pro, I get a list of sounds. It says either I don't have the correct license or sounds, but I do have both. How to fix it, please? So it says either I don't have the correct license or sounds. But I do have both. Now, how to fix it, please? So if it's, I would check to make sure. So there's, often you may see licensing messages. So you may want to just, make sure that you have the license available here. So when you go to your USB e-licenser, that you have the different, all the different sound set licenses, and you could determine, and this could be a bit confusing, and we have some people that, can be a bit generous towards themselves when you go to the Steinberg download assistant, and make sure if you don't see your license, your license listed for the sound pack, and you think that it comes with Cubase, you could verify this by going to the Steinberg download assistant and clicking on Cubase Pro 11, and all of the sound sets that you see listed here come with the program, and that's included with your Cubase license. But if we go to, some of the other sounds and loops, these are generally going to be sold extra. So, and if you see this, you'll see the corresponding license in the e-licenser program. So as soon as you open it, so if it's one of these names that you see here in this list, and you don't see the actual license on your e-licenser, then that's why you're getting the message. If you get to the point where, it's like maybe you downloaded some extra sounds unintentionally, which happens a lot because anyone could download these, but they won't work unless you have the license. And that's probably the type of message that you're getting. If you go to the Steinberg Library Manager, here you could see all of your different Cubase sounds, and you could choose to remove those particular sounds, but make sure that it's going to be part of the license that you have, and if you have all the sounds and loops here, that you see that in the e-licenser program, that you see the license here. So and it could be that maybe you just downloaded extra sounds or from a trial version, something like that. And then I would use, again, the library manager to remove those sounds. So if you could let us know what exact messages or sound sets are getting flagged, I could let you know if they are, included with Cubase or sold separately, and you could check to see if you purchased those. Okay. Question. Can you open the sampler track in a separate window and leave it open when selecting other tracks like the note editor? Okay, so I'll come over here. Let's make a sampler track. Okay, so I'm going to take it into its own separate window. So now, so I think so it looks like it kind of disappears. Let's just, and I'm going to try just something here quickly, see if there's, all right, so say if I have this in a separate window and so it looks like the sampler track will disappear when you look at the actual note data, but you could, so I don't know a way to make that to stay, but let me see if I open the note editor. Let me just check one preference here really quickly. Okay, so I'm gonna, so let's say if I have this in a separate window, if I go to, so you could have the editor in its own window with the sampler track, but it doesn't look like the sampler track could be in its own dedicated window with the while you're in the lower zone editor. So, but I'll just try one more thing with the preferences. And I'm going to say double click opens in a window. So now when I do this, let's say if I go to my sampler track, yeah, it looks like you get to, have the sampler track in the lower zone, but not the floating window with the key editor in the lower zone. So I'll pass that along as kind of something that could be helpful. Thanks for letting us know. All right, wonderful to see Gareth on the live stream. So I played a bass line for him, so I'm glad you like the sound of the fretless and playing. So that was a fun project. I like that one, Michael. So. Okay, so we have a question. When you open up audio clip in editor, you see the whole audio file with region highlighted that you used in project. How can you make the editor show only the edited audio clip? Okay, so let me just come over here. I'll take a long audio file. Okay, so let's say if I'm just using a small part of this particular audio file, I double click. Okay, so I'll just make this even a bit smaller. Okay, so now when we double click, we go into the sample editor and we still see kind of the whole file. So let's see if we could. Okay, so we could see kind of the event end and start, but I think what you want to do is to hide what was before and after. So you may not be able to do that because you are still editing the audio file, but you could clearly kind of see the delineations with the label here. But since it is the file, if you want it to, let's see if I maybe turn this into a part. All right, so if we turn it into a part, so it's selecting it and going, and this is kind of, you could choose to dissolve the part. So, but if you select the event and then choose events to part and double click, then you're only seeing kind of the actual part and not the entire audio file. So I know that may be a bit of an awkward workaround, but that should be able to get it to you want. So that'll take you into the part editor, but it may not do exactly what you want, because otherwise when you do this, you're going to edit the event, and this will allow you to do editing on the audio file as well as stuff like, okay, I just wanted to slip the audio within the event as well and still be able to have before and after. But when you click here, this will show you, the, kind of the boundaries of the selection. Okay, a question. Now that I have everything and 100% and hundreds of musical ideas, I need to comprehend everything in Hallian Sonic multi-program saving using 16 channels of MIDI. Can there be more than 16 channels? So Hallian Sonic itself will be 16 channels. So if you do Hallian Sonic SE, that will kind of top out at 16 channels, and I believe Hallian Sonic, not the SE version, but Hallian Sonic will do the same. Let's test. And when we get into the full version of Hallian, I will just, let me clear my throat really quick. When we get into the full version of Hallian, we could choose to, and we'll choose under sampler. So if you have Hallian 6 at this point, you could have not only, let's say, 16 MIDI channels, but you could have 4 ports of 16 MIDI channels. So if you wanted to, come here, you'll see A1. So there's 16 MIDI channels on port B, and port, A, B, C, D, each with 16 MIDI channels. So if we have everything kind of set up as we want here, let's say in Hallian Sonic, at this point we could choose to, save a multi-program. So if you find that, this is going to be your orchestral template, you could now just come over here, save this. And I have this unloaded. Let's say I'll just load in other sounds. So now if I wanted to just come here, I could just click on Jeff, and that will reload all the sounds. As we saw, all 16 different sounds can be kind of recalled as a single entity, as opposed to having to load 16 individual sounds, which is, I guess, cool if you get paid by the hour. But a lot of people, so that's kind of, saving like 16 individual sounds with their different levels as one preset. And that's what you could do with the multi preset here. So just show one more time, we'll come over here and just save the multi program, and then open that up, and you'll be all set. Okay, so we see, hi Greg, how can I use arpeggiator in the sample editor with some audio sample if you do not know how to do it in some other way? So let's say I wanted to take, so I will come here. So in this, I think we could do this in a sampler track. So I will, okay, so I'll just create a sampler track of this. So we'll have one note. And I'll just make it a little louder here so we could all hear it a little easier. And now, so I have that an audio file, and if I wanted to do arpeggios, I could go to the MIDI inserts and just go to Apache and that's really kind of all you had to do. So take the audio file, drag and drop it into the sampler track. And you could also just, from the media bay, right click. And let's say, okay, I just want to take like one particular note here. So let's say, okay, let's just take this note of the guitar. And I'll just go to my Apache and I'll just put this as eighth notes. So now as I hold down a chord on my MIDI controller, so I can hold that down and say, okay, let's do. So you do stuff like that. So turn it into a sampler track, and from the MIDI inserts, load up Apache 5 or Apache SX, and you could just arpeggiate any audio file very quickly. Okay, just reading through comments. So we just see a comment from Pylon Records. Is there anything Cubase cannot do? Wow, I cannot wait until there is a plugin inside Cubase to control my studio light and start up espresso machine. Love the program and all these sessions. I guess we should have Cubase trigger Alexa commands for smart plugs or something like that. So that we can say, Cubase, turn on my studio light scene 2. Start coffee. We see Jazz Dude saying, trust Cubase, it could do the job for you. Okay, question. How do you create a tempo track from a reference track, a full mixed down track? Okay, so I think we have a project just to show that. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. And if you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And that allows us to continue to do these free live streams, helping people out. Okay, so let's say we have a audio file here. And it's not aligned to the tempo. So I'm going to select the event, go to my project menu, to tempo detection, and I'll say analyze. And you'll have some adjustments here. So if it's, you need to like multiply by 2, divide by 2, or offbeat correction. So this will figure out kind of what the beats are, and we'll place everything in 1/4 time, so you can define where the downbeat is. So at this point, and we can see this, and this is our tempo map that's been created from our 2-track mix. Okay, so I just see a question from Sven Isaacson. Is there a way to manually reorder the input channels and audio connections? I can sort them by clearing and rebuild the list, but the next time I open Cubase, they're scrambled again. Making a preset makes no difference. So the only time I've kind of seen this happen, I've seen this maybe on Mac OS if there's different orders, if you're using an aggregate device where, sometimes certain audio drivers will be loaded first or in different orders, and that could throw off the audio connections because the order is changed from what it was set to previously. So Sven, if you could let us know if it's an aggregate device situation or not, that could be helpful. If it's not with aggregate device, I know you said that the presets aren't working for you, but that's generally worked. But if it's an aggregate device and then the order that the aggregate device is being seen independently or different than it was before, then it may cause issues. And that's unfortunately something kind of tied into core audio. And it affects other programs as well with aggregate drivers. So Sven, let us know that. That would be helpful. All right, question from C Notes. Hey, Greg, is there a way to share and import other Cubase users' color schemes? If so, where can I find them? Generally, the color schemes are actually just stored within a particular project. So someone could send you a project with, no data in it, and the colors would carry over. And you could also go, if you go to the project color setup, there's presets. So you could save these as presets. So if you wanted to, store that color set, but just simply save it, transfer it over via a project or template, and all the colors will carry over. So have someone send you a project, and then you could save the colors. Okay, question from Gareth. Can Cubase 6.5 open a Cubase 11 project, or is there a save as option in 11? So there isn't, the file format is the same. Most of the time, if you're not using like very specific newer features, but the projects, if it's just going to be like audio and MIDI and you have like the mixer settings, I think that those will translate. Going back to version 1, but if there's features that are being employed, that those may not translate over. So it could really depend on the project and how extensively new features are being used in that particular project. But the file format is the same, but certain features may not translate over, and sometimes that could cause it to hang up. But if it's just a matter of MIDI information, like maybe like a static mix console, kind of almost like if it doesn't translate over, just kind of make a more generic version of it without plugins, render stuff like Very Audio 3 capabilities, and I think you could get it to work if you kind of finesse it a little bit. All right, so we have the Monk Beats checking in from Italy. Thanks for Thanks for joining our live stream. All right. All right, so we have CJ checking in from Trinidad. Thank you for joining us and welcome. Okay, so we have a question. Can you show us how to change tempo of any VST taken from Media Bay? For instance, my session is in 100 beats per minute and my VST loop is 120 beats a minute. And I have to change that to 100 beats per minute. So really all you need to do is to, once you know what the tempo is, so let's say back on our example here, if I wanted to take this, and if I wanted a loop to fit this tempo, even though it's varying in tempo, so this will be basically the same process. I'll go to my media, to loops. I'll find a quick... all right, so I'm going to find just an audio loop here. So say... All right, so I'm going to drag this in and drop it right on beat one. And what I want to do is you'll see this little indication here in the info line for musical mode. So now if I play this, we'll have the drum loops going to play back at its original tempo and not in sync. Now we could also enable musical mode from the media bay. So if you go to the audio pool, you could just come here and say, okay, this particular drum, I wanted to enable musical mode. There's another method, or just selecting it and putting it into musical mode here. And we can see that this isn't fitting an even number of measures. But now that, since Cubase knows what the tempo is of the loop that was dragged in, and most loops will have this as metadata available, place it into musical mode. And now as we come here, this loop will automatically speed up and slow down to match the tempo of the jazz piece. So all you have to do really is select the event and enable musical mode. And if it has the right tempo stamp, which most of the loops that you're going to be dragging in from Media Bay will, it'll just kind of be like, I often refer to it as a tempo parasite. So it speeds up, it's just going to follow, it's just going to hang on and just kind of play perfectly in sync for you. All right, wonderful to see Pablo is able to join us from Galicia, España. All right, and we have Daryl checking in from Oakland, California. All right, so we just see GUI saying, I wish I had the cash to buy this version. You could always start off with Cubase Elements and kind of work your way up. And there are promotions that go on throughout the year. So pay attention to that as well. Okay, my chat field just moved on me. Apologize for that. Just gonna... Let me find my spot. Okay, so we see question, while writing automation with an external controller, how to avoid Cubase to open, follow the tracks, receiving automation, how activate, deactivate this with a macro. Okay, so I'm just going to reread this one more time. Okay, so let's say we have automation going on this track. Okay, so let's say we'll take the drum loop here. Okay, so how to avoid Cubase to open, follow tracks, receiving. Okay, so this is how to avoid Cubase to open / follow the tracks receiving automation. How activate, deactivate this key command. So it's going to be just, if you wanted to stop writing the automation, I think it's just going to be, you could just hit the W key for, write automation. So I think if I just wanted to come here and let me make sure I have just verify the key command. Yeah, so just hitting the W key. So let's say if I'm here and I'm playing and I just wanted to automate this, you could just hit the W key there, and so I don't really have this. So let's say if I now just want to go to the fader, anything that I'm doing. So, and once I'm here, I could just, if I don't have the W key turned on, it's not going to write the automation. But as soon as I select this particular track with the W on, that starts to write the automation. So it's only going to write automation on the track where you hit the W on, where you could, just choose to write that particular automation just there. So maybe just make sure that, whatever tracks that you want the automation on, that it can write to. And let me just see if there's a preference. Sometimes, yeah, so it looks like, as soon as so let's say, we're in touch automation. So if I come here, if the, read the right automation isn't enabled, I can, make adjustments to it, but it's not going to actually automate until you hit the right button. So, but if I'm misunderstanding your question, just let me know. Okay, question. Could you demonstrate the difference between quick controls and VST quick controls and how they could best be used? I get there will be a broad range of context. So with quick controls, we could think of, we could have kind of VST quick controls and track quick controls. And we could have, when we go to our studio setup, we could, determine, if we wanted to have different controllers for track quick controls. And we think of track as being more for the actual audio track itself, and VST for instrument parameters. Once we have an instrument added, I could come and let's add an instrument track, and I'll just do something like retro log. So as soon as I add this track, each of the instruments will automatically kind of load up their 8 go-to quick control parameters. So these could be like the most relevant parameters. And so I just have my controller here that's mapped for quick controls. So that's controlling those. And if I wanted to change one particular parameter, I could say, okay, I really want the coarse tuning for quick control 2. What I could do is click on the L button here and move the parameter with that slot selected, and that will assign that particular parameter to that slot. So we click on L, and now we could just remap those quick controls. Now, if you want quick controls to do, additional functionality, if you need more than 8, you could save each of those as a preset and call those up at any time. So if I come and want to just adjust the send levels on all the tracks for the 8 sends on that particular track, we could do that. If I wanted to adjust the volume let's go to the audio channels, I could adjust the volume, the panning, low cut on and off, our low cut filter, high cut on and off, sends 1 and 2. So we could just have these always available, and just kind of having 8 parameter knobs, like we see on many MIDI controllers, 8 knobs, 8 buttons, So those eight knobs could be doing quick control, and you could control any parameter in the plugin that you want, just directly from there. And if you want to physically assign and go through the list, you can say, okay, I just wanted to go to the sends to send 1, and I want to send 1 level there. So, or if you have inserts on a particular plugin, all those insert parameters are also available for control via quick control. All right, so I see from David Rogers, it says, I sent an email during the week regarding Melodyne and vocal tuning. So if you could maybe re-ask the question. I don't remember getting that when I was, if that was for last week, but, or I think I may have remembered it, but, I don't know. I don't have Melodyne installed on my system. But I think what you need to do, if I remember right, I'm sorry if I missed it previously, but if you just wanted to come over, generally you could run that as an ARA2 extension. So if you go over here to select the audio event that you want to do, you could also just come over here and launch Melodyne, just like an extension, like we see spectral layers here. But I don't have Melodyne installed on my system, and I'm not a real Melodyne expert. I tend to use the built-in Vari Audio. So, but that's how you could access it. But if it was a different question, just feel free to ask the question again, David. Okay, so I just see maybe David's giving some more information. It says just asked about vocal tone in New 11 Pro, but I'm not going to be able to stay in the chat the whole time. Meetings. So yeah, just if you want to email me again, if you get a chance, I'll see if I could catch the email during the live stream. So. Okay, so I have a question. I can't hear the samples in my library until I drag it in my project. Cubase plays it in a corner right, but no sound is coming out. Everything else is fine. Thanks for support. So generally these go through like the listen bus. And so you might have to go into your audio connections window from your studio menu and go to your control room and activate. You'll see where you could add monitor, and then, and this will seem counterintuitive at first, but if we come here, we want to say not connected for outputs. And when we go to our control room, we want to add a monitor and set the control room to your outputs where your monitoring system or your powered speakers are connected to. And then when you come over here, you could just audition all of your different loops. And kind of the logic behind this, I think, is that, since these tracks aren't assigned to a physical track, that, it doesn't know where to, this is a place to send the audio that's kind of project, we'll call it agnostic. So it's not going through any plugins or, different outputs. So it's going to be just going to what's called the listen bus. And once you have the listen bus kind of configured, just by activating monitors in the control room, that you should be able to, hear the loops as you select them on the right-hand zone of Media Bay. Okay, so we see a question. Hey, brother, I'm moving from Studio One to Cubase 11 Pro, and I was wondering if there's a way to import my files into Cubase, because I tried already, but it doesn't seem to be that smooth for me. So, generally there isn't a magic bullet for taking your files over. There's the two main formats for taking files over for audio are going to be OMF, and kind of a more updated version of that would be AAF. So if you have the ability to export in Studio One, and just come over here, export it as an AAF file, and be able to import it as an AAF file in Cubase. The audio with some rudimentary fades will carry over. The MIDI information, AAF and OMF only deal with audio and video, so they don't have any way of translating, MIDI information along with that. So you may have to take all the MIDI information and export it as a MIDI file and import that into a MIDI file into Cubase. All right, wonderful to see Kristen and David from Nashville. So yeah, I hope to be back in Nashville soon. So, we're still under kind of travel freezes, but I miss seeing you guys and hope you both are well. All right, so we have a question. Which is nice dynamic EQ in Cubase 10.5 Pro? So in Cubase 10.5 Pro, there isn't a dynamic EQ. In version 11, if you go to the frequency EQ plugin, within the frequency EQ plugin now, you could activate dynamic mode and switch so that each of the bands can not only function as left, right, stereo, mid, side, but they could also just go directly into dynamic mode. So, and that was one of the new features of Cubase 11. So it may not operate in Cubase 10.5. And probably that feature alone for many, as well as, Squasher, Supervision, many other functions, the new MIDI editing, the export is definitely worth the price of upgrade from 10.5 to 11. So I just see a question from Michael Teams. Greg, has the e-licenser down? So I haven't, usually if the e-licenser is down, I kind of get like an email, but I haven't received any notification that the e-licenser is down. So it's usually something that goes out pretty quick, kind of like a, NASA mission control for, Steinberg staff. So I haven't received any indication yet. So okay, so I see from Creed is kind of further clarification from our license and content discussion. So it says, Greg, I do have the license and the sounds, but they still show up every time I open Cubase. Creed, if you could let us know exactly which library messages that you're getting, and I know unfortunately we can't like post a simple screenshot, but if you could let us know in the comments, that would be helpful. Or if you want to send me a screenshot, you could email it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so we see from Keith Young, question. Hello, Greg. Could you do a quick run through the time warp function with Groove Agent 4? I'm trying to match an audio guitar track of fluctuating tempo. So let's take a look. So I'm not sure if it's like a sample that's going to be within Groove Agent 4. So we'll kind of take a look at it both ways, just to make sure. So I'll add okay, so let's say if I just want to find a quick. Okay, so let's say I want to take that. All right, so let's say if I wanted to do, so I'm not sure if you just want to. Okay, so let's say within Groove Agent 4, if I wanted to take this, and all right, so let's say we'll create slices here. So I'm not sure if you wanted to kind of do the slices here and be able to make that follow, or if you have an existing project. So let's say if we take, so, you know, you could do that, but if you wanted Groove Agent to automatically, let's say, follow the tempo of this track that has fluctuating parts. So let's say if I'll just load up a quick Groove Agent sound, like a kit. Okay, so let's say I just wanted to do maybe like a fusion thing here. All right, so when you play back the, you know, if you have like the varying tempo of the guitar part and you have that tempo map created like we showed just a couple minutes ago. So now I could hit transport, follow transport, and Groove Agent's going to play back the particular pattern kind of with the same, within the same tempo. So as I hit play. And let me just... So at this point, let me just find something that's a little more straightforward to show the point here. So now, as soon as I would just... So Groove Agent's automatically mapping and synchronizing to the tempo. So as long as you have the tempo of the guitar part figured out, if you wanted Groove Agent to... And I could say, okay, let's do our tempo scale to half. So now the pattern in Groove Agent is just automatically speeding up and slowing down. And if I bypass the tempo map here, we could hear that getting off, but as soon as we enable... So let's say we'll turn this off. But now that we have Groove Agent will follow the tempo that's extracted. So as soon as I come here, so at that point, Groove Agent will follow the tempo automatically. Okay. All right, great to see Jeff Sabelski has all of his Iconica downloads sorted out. Sorry it took you a while, but I think it's probably worth the wait. Okay, so we have a question from Tanmay. Does Cubase have an unlimited sidechain inputs? Because when I wanted to add sidechain my vocals after 6 instances, I cannot select my vocals. All right, so let's say I'm going to add, we'll do 16 audio tracks. Okay, so let's say track 16 is vocals. Okay, and let me just go ahead and add. All right, so there I went beyond 6, but I added 15 sidechain inputs for this particular track, which I just named vocal. So it doesn't seem like there's a limit to how many that you could add. So there may be a limit, but it's beyond 6. So let me know if you're doing it maybe a different way, Tanmay. But great to see you on the live stream. Okay, so you see from question from Tanmay, is there a key command that denotes or mimics the enter key on the keyboard? So I think it's just the enter key itself. But let me know if I'm misunderstanding. So if you're trying to trigger a key command for the enter key, I think it is just the enter key. But I know sometimes if you're building macros, you may have to get to the point where a window could open up and you may have to hit enter, but it can't necessarily, like the enter key, some keys are so common that they're not really unique to a particular function, and like the enter key could do that where it's kind of a bit generic. So you may not, if you have a dialog box that pops up, you may just have to hit the enter key physically, but not through a key command other than physically hitting the enter key. Okay, so you just see from Jazz Dude, he's asking, I missed some Dolby Atmos surround templates in the hub. Are there none? The whole hub doesn't show any Nuendo template. So generally, I don't know if there are any Atmos templates. And generally, the hub in, I don't know if there's many templates that actually come as a part of Nuendo, and it could be maybe like more of a philosophical decision that some people are going to be configuring their own hubs as opposed to I want to do like a clean acoustic guitar and vocals with reverb and maybe drums and different things like that. So generally I think by default that there aren't any templates that come with it. Okay, so we see from Tanmay, when I group tracks, the contents of them get the color of the group channel they are routed to. Is there a way not to do that? Okay, so let's say if I go to my mix console and I wanted to take, and let me add a group channel here. All right, and I will go ahead and colorize the group channel. Let's make it very obvious yellow. So I will route these particular tracks to the group channel. All right, so now when I'm here, this is routed to group one, group one, group one. So all those tracks are routed to group one, and they didn't assume the group colors. So let me know if you're doing it a different way, Tanmay. And I don't think there's any preferences for that behavior. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, I have a 10.5 LE version. How can I do a denoise? I want to take a sound profile and remove the background noise from a vocal. Thanks. So Cubase 10.5 LE doesn't have any denoising capabilities. If you get some of the more advanced versions, or if you wanted to, you could do some denoising within like more full-featured versions of Spectral Layers or Wavelab Elements, or Wavelab Elements would also allow you to do denoising, but 10.5 LE by default doesn't have denoising where you could take kind of a sound profile, but in the bigger versions you could do that, or using Wavelab Elements. Spectral Layers does a fantastic job of that as well. All right, question. How to change the color palette and import new skins? So changing the color palette is pretty easy. Go to your edit menu, project menu, and go to project colors setup. So if you wanted to just double click, you could move the color wheel and be able to come up with your own colors if you wanted to. Another way that you could kind of accomplish this to get more colors accessible is you'll see number of basic colors. You could just change that to 32 and number of color tints to 4. And now you do this, when you go to access colors, you could have 128 different colors to choose from. So that's a quick, easy way. And then if you wanted to set track color to default, you could do that, and all those colors will be available in any project. Okay, we have a question from Daryl. So when you are working with large numbers of tracks, is there a way to hide tracks that you don't want to work on at that time? So let's say I have a number of audio tracks here in the middle. If you go to the Inspector tab, you could click on Invisibility, and now you could just come here and hide these particular tracks. So as we scroll up and down, those tracks are hidden. If all of those tracks are within a folder, you could also just hide the folder. But that's where you could hide tracks, and you could store those as presets if you wanted to as well. So again, the inspector to visibility settings. All right, thank you for all the wonderful questions. And again, if you've learned something new, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that as well. Okay, so we see question, how to automate a band of EQ. So let's say if I'm on this jazz mixdown track here, and I wanted to automate a band of the EQ, I'm going to open up the channel editor, and I'm going to enable write just by hitting W. So, and that will turn on read as well. So if I'm here, now that I'm grabbing this, if I wanted to adjust the Q or frequency, or gain or cut. So now when I rewind here, I could just have that playback exactly as it was. So we'll see all the automation will start to kick in pretty soon. So I'll move the mouse here so you could. So that's how you could automate a band of EQ. All right. So we have a question from Tanmay. Let me find my spot. Can you show the voice designer plugin in Nuendo and pitch driver and Doppler too? All right, so let's take a look. All right, let me just see. I think it might have some files under here. Okay, so let's look at Voice Designer. So Voice Designer is kind of like, a plugin that's like really good for, we see this a lot for game stuff. So let's listen to just a typical voiceover file here, and let me make sure it's where you guys could hear it as well. Okay, so let's see, we should be able to hear it.
It's how to impart signs of one's interest and how to know when one is the object of some.
So let's say we just have a typical voiceover and someone needs you to come up with like a monster or robot type of sound.
The Art and
you
Science
can come over
of
here. This is what
Classes
Voice
last 3
Designer
hours, and the curriculum
does.
includes how to impart signs of one's interest and how to know when one is the object of someone's interest. The cost is $65, and students include
the newly unattached and out of practice, the all-work professionals who never learned how to play, and the painfully
shy. The instructor is
Catherine Brown, who's 30 years old and single. She doesn't teach her students any surefire opening lines because she
says there aren't any.
All right, so that's kind of like what Voice Designer does. A wonderful sound design tool. All right, let me just scroll back up. Okay, let's see what else Tammy wanted to see. So pitch driver. So let's go ahead and haven't worked with that one in a while.
Science of flirting. Classes last 3 hours, and the curriculum includes how to impart signs of one. How to know when one is
the object of someone's interest. The cost is
$65, and students include unattached and out of practice, the all-work professionals who never learned how to play, and the painfully shy. The instructor is Catherine Brown, who's 30 years old and shy. Teach her students any surefire open.
All right, and Tammy also wanted to see the Doppler. Okay, so let me just. Okay, so let's say if we have, and I'll just open up a quick video. So let's say we have, let's say we have, imagine this was an ambulance. This is not such a great demo of this, but I think we'll get the idea. So if I wanted to simulate a Doppler effect, and this is kind of, for that car that's passing us, what we could do is we go to our offline processing. So I'm going to just select the event, and we'll go to our plugin. And let's open up our Doppler, and we're going to put this, I think we're going to put it into manual mode. So, and what I want to do is just kind of set this up. Okay, so I'll put it into automatic mode. So we're going to say we see the car start there. And as we move, sorry, let me just. And we can see kind of this, the car will start to transition. We'll say there. It's going to be at the listener perspective. Kind of when it's in front of the listener, say roughly there. And at the end of the file, let's say that's the end. So now as we listen to the siren, which was all the same pitch before, and I'll take it out of cycle mode, sorry. And you could obviously kind of refine it a little bit, but that gives you kind of an idea what the Doppler effect could do. So if you have to do like for post-production, making the ambulance sound appropriate, that's what the Doppler effect will allow you to do. So that should, those are kind of what those three functions innuendo will allow you to get out of. So again, if you're doing those types of work, not having to buy additional tools and having that integrated deeply with Innuendo is a great resource. All right, so I just see from Tanmay just saying when tracks are in folder in the inspector and the tracks when selected within the folder, the track inspector menu gets hidden and just shows a black bar in Cubase 11. So I'll pass that along again. So we'll just kind of show this. So I'll make all the tracks a little smaller. All right, so now so it says when the tracks, when selected within the folder, that those become kind of a little graphics glitch. So I'll make sure to pass that along again, Tanmay, which I did earlier. So, all right, so we see Michael Pierce is going to help a child with trigonometry. So. Okay, so we see a question from Tanmay. How to glue two MIDI parts with an empty space between them, as in they are one MIDI part but have a space of, let's say, 4 bars between them. Okay, so let's go ahead and add. just going to toggle my preference from previously. Okay, and now I'll make a copy. All right, so let's say if I'm here, I don't think the glue gun works, but yeah, it looks like the glue gun just works. So our parts were separate, and now what I want to do is just grab the glue gun, and now it's all one nice happy part. Okay, so now a question from Daryl. How to set up control name in devices when you are adding a MIDI controller. When I click on Untitled to change the name, nothing happens. Okay, so it's... Okay, so it says when you're adding a MIDI controller, when I click on Untitled to change the name, nothing happens. All right, so let's say... All right, so we go to... Let me just make sure I'm understanding the question. All right, so how to set up a control name in devices when you're adding a MIDI controller. When I click on Untitled to change the name, nothing happens. So if you're here, and let's say it's a MIDI controller, if you go to the MIDI port setup, so I'm not sure if you're changing it here. So let's say, okay, I wanted my panorama to be called Daryl. Or I'm just going to copy this first. Okay, so now when I go to my MIDI track and for the input port, so you could just see the name right there. So let me know if that's what you want to do, Daryl, or if I'm misunderstanding your question. But if you wanted to rename your MIDI controller, you could do it just like that. Okay, we have a question. Greg, you told us a few weeks ago that for 5.1 we need 6 outputs. Is it possible to assign 2 outputs to my UR44C, 2 to a UR22C, and 2 to a UR24? Or do I need an interface with 6 outputs? Any suggestions? So, generally, if you're running, you could do it through ASIO for all, and it's going to be a less than satisfactory experience. The UR44C does have 4 outputs already. But, I would always advise having one audio interface. On the Mac OS, you could do aggregate devices. They can be problematic. They compound latency. So I think it's always going to be best to get an audio interface that has the, 6 analog outputs. You could kind of fake your way through it, but, it's going to be less than satisfactory. And some audio interfaces you could stack depending upon their architecture. Generally, USB audio interfaces do not stack well together. Okay, so we have a question. I would like to duplicate audio events and give them each their own time stretch algorithm, but they all change when I switch one. Is there a way to keep them independent from each other? Okay, so let's say I'll just quickly record a little bit of an audio file here. Okay, so I've now recorded this and I want to duplicate this. So right now when we look at this, you know, this is the same exact audio file that's just playing back twice. So I'll switch this one to time. And let's say to this file here, I wanted to switch it to tape. So let's see. So they're both, since they're both referencing files. Now, oftentimes you may have the option, there's a preference, and this may apply here, it may not. So let's take a look at it. So on editing audio, so since it's not actually processing, so you might have to say, so if you're doing like a processing file, like, you know, normalizing it, applying plugins, you could have it automatically open up an options dialog box. But what you may have to do, since it's the same exact audio file, probably just go to bounce selection and choose to replace events. So let's say now I wanted that to be tape and I want the next one to be time. So you may have to just take a copy, because it is the same exact audio file that's been duplicated, and, you know, do a bounce selection, and that will create a new audio file. It may not be exactly what we want, but that would create a new audio file that could have independent time stretch algorithms. And once again, if you learned something new, make sure you hit the like button. And if you subscribe to the channel, make sure you do that as well. Okay, we have a question. How do you convert MIDI to audio in a project? So there's a number of different ways of doing it. Probably the easiest way is to use render in place. So let's say if I add an instrument track, all right, and let me just add some oboe parts here in honor of Jeff Sabelski, an oboist. And I'll make this just a little louder. So, okay, so if I have that part and I wanted to turn that into audio, it's like really all you have to do is come and go to edit, to render in place. There's render settings where you could choose, you know, if you want it to be multiple events, one single event, include processing. If you wanted to mute the source event, so I could just click on render. That will place that rendered audio file directly below. So let me see if I... And you could also just do the track itself. So let me just... And here, see if I have anything else that's actively selected in the project. But generally just go to render in place. And I'll just try it with another quick project here so you can see it. So let's see if so that'll take that MIDI file and just automatically turn it directly into an audio event directly on the project. Okay, so we have a question. Sometimes I like to use virtual guitar pedals on vocals, but recently I tried it in Cubase and it didn't seem to be working. Help, please. So let's come over here. I'll just add a quick vocal audio file.
I feel.
Okay, so let's say this is where our vocal is. So we'll listen to it.
I feel the weight.
Okay, now
I feel the.
so I'm just going to go to my inserts. Now, sometimes you may not, if you're doing it during tracking, you may have to disable direct monitoring in your VST audio system setup and your studio setup. But let's come over here to under distortion. We could go to our VST amp rack, and I'm going to choose no amplifier, no cabinet, and let's go to like our effects. So let's say, okay, I just wanted to run, a tape delay. So as we listen to our vocal,
I feel the weight.
and it helps if I turn it on. That would be
I
good.
feel the weight.
All right, so let's see if this is.
I feel the weight.
Let me just try it as pre-effects.
I feel the weight.
And let me just check, make sure. So. Let's see if we turn the amp on, if that makes a difference.
I feel the weight.
All right, so it seems like that should be working. We tried just another older. We could try from maybe the bass amp, see if that makes. Okay, maybe I just had it on the wrong channel, but so when I come here, we could put an octaver. Let's put a tape ducking delay on. So
I feel the weight.
turn it on. So
I feel the weight.
and I'll choose no amp, so we could just hear like your guitar
Feel
pedals.
the weight.
So, and let me just try the guitar amp one more time. Make sure let's get to the VST amp rack. All right, so it's definitely working. And I'll go to the amplifier section. So that seems to be, I'm not sure if I put on the wrong track before,
Feel the weight.
but you could have kind of your different pre or post effects here. So if you wanted to add another, let's say tremolo to the vocal.
I feel the weight.
So you could definitely do that. But if you're trying to do it like during the real time recording process, you may have to come over here and disable direct monitoring or within your control panel for your audio interface. Okay, so we have a question when creating track archives. What is the difference between copy media files and reference media files when I'm saving track archive? So if I wanted to save that audio file as a track archive, I could go over here to export, we'll say selected tracks, and we see copy media files and reference media files. So the track archive could actually include the audio file, and that's what copy media files will do. So it'll make a copy of all the settings and the actual file here. If we know that this file is going to stay and remain in the same location, but I primarily wanted to change I wanted to export like the EQs, the effects, and different settings in the channel, and I'm confident that the audio file is going to remain in the same location, I could save this as a reference media file. So it says it's going to reference, okay, this track preset goes directly with this audio file that's in this location. And then you could import that, and it will import the file from the location without saving a new independent version of that file. So copy media files, when you export it, will include the audio within the track archive. If you wanted to just say, do all these settings and play this file found in this folder, and when you import it, import from this particular folder, that's when you could use the reference media files. All right, wonderful to see JVI on the live stream. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to use multiple sound cards? So generally, most audio interfaces don't have the capabilities. If you're running Mac OS, as we mentioned before, you could run aggregate devices. Your latency kind of creeps up because it's compounding the latency. So it's adding the latency of one interface with another, and the routing can get to be a little tricky. So you could do that on Mac OS. On Windows, if you want to do it, you could simply run ASIO for all, but again, it's not incredibly stable, and you can lose a lot of capabilities of your interface, and I think even limits you to 48K. I'm not sure if it does above that. I could be mistaken, but again, it's a less than satisfactory experience. So if you need to get to expand your audio interface, I will always suggest getting an audio interface that some interfaces, like in my studio, I use our older Steinberg MR816 interfaces, and I use 2 of those. And you could take the FireWire out, which seems, they're older interfaces, but they still run, super well. And I could take the FireWire out of one and connect it into the other, and then it's seeing it as two audio interfaces. So Thunderbolt can have that capability, FireWire can. PCI interfaces can, but generally USB interfaces don't allow you to stack multiple interfaces. So there are some workarounds. They are going to be less than satisfactory. So if you are, I want to get into surround, maybe not now, but down the road, plan on getting an interface with enough outputs to do it. So okay, let's go to the next question. Is there a way to have Cubase delete all audio files that are not presently used in the arrangement? Destructive. All right, so let's say I wanted to take a number of files here. All right, and I'm just going to go ahead and just do beautiful fake recording. Okay, so let's say I've recorded these files. So if I deleted the files, let's say if I hit backspace, I could, choose to delete all of the files. And then from your media menu, you could say, so we have audio 4, 5, 6, 7. So let's open up our pool window. So at this point, we see audio. So once we've done that, so let's say I've deleted them. All right, so we look at our pool window. We're going to notice that they're going to be in the trash. So at this point, we could right click. And so it's kind of a two-step process just to be safe. And you can say, one is you could initiate this by saying remove unused media, or you could just say empty trash. And you'll get asked again because, people don't like losing their amazing audio files. And you could say you could erase it from the pool or just erase the files from your computer's hard disk. So that's how you do it. So it's a multi-stage process just for safety reasons, because it's really, it's much more difficult to try to recover a missing file. And I've seen it happen to some of the most seasoned engineers in the world who have multiple Grammys and have had to tell the client, it's like, hey, I lost your track. You don't want to be in that position. So. Okay, so Jeff Zabelski is asking, could you present for us uses of the flex phraser, please? All right, so this is found in Hallian and Hallian Sonic. So let's say if I wanted to go to my Hallian Sonic SE and I wanted to, let's have a string part, or I'll just start with an oboe part since it's Jeff and that's his primary instrument. So I will. So if I play a chord now, it's just going to kind of play back. So, but if I wanted to do like interesting arpeggios, I could just say, okay, let's go to edit. Okay, so I think if we go to. All right. So I think we go to MIDI. Let me just see if I can remember where we could do that directly from the. Okay, so here we can see. All right, so. I usually do it kind of in Hallian, but let's see if I can find it here quickly. Oh, I'm in Hallian Sonic SE3, so that's kind of why. So let me do it in Hallian Sonic SE. Sorry about that. Hate when it's operator error on my part. All right, so let's say. Okay, so I want to take a. Let's come back to. Just do a quick winds. All right, so now. Let me just adjust this so now I can. Okay, so now I will come to edit. So okay. All right, so we'll have our oboes. Let's go to our flex phraser, and I'm going to. All right, so let me just. Okay, so we have our flex phraser, so we're going to turn this on. So now I could say, okay. All right, so, and we could just have this kind of do, multiple different types of arpeggiation. So let's say I just want to do kind of a classic arpeggio for down for the oboes. So I could come here. And for my next instrument, I wanted to, let's do maybe cello. So at this point, if we go to channel 2, or we could actually layer this together. So I'm going to go to MIDI. Let's put this on channel 1. So now that we have this, I wanted to do a different arpeggiation. So let's say, okay, I want to do strings. And let's do, general strings. So let's say cello 1, arpeggio. So I could have one arpeggiator, one flex phraser playing the oboe. And just playing a chord, I could have a different flex phraser. And at this point, you could say, okay, I wanted to do, a different instrument. So let's say, let's say timpani. And I wanted the timpani to do, again, let's come to the program, turn on our flex phraser, and I just wanted this to do bass. And, try stuff that's like really weird and different. So let's say, okay, you want to do fingered bass. And we'll make the tempo scale set to quarter notes. So now I'll assign this to MIDI channel 1. So you could kind of create a monster. And let's say I just wanted the violin, the cellos to also just transpose down an octave. So I go. And at this point, you can say, I wanted to add a guitar, and it's just like really, amazing for guitar stuff as well. So let's say if I just wanted to go to like a guitar part, and sometimes, guitar parts can be really tricky to work with. So I can say, okay, I just want to come to an acoustic guitar, and let's do like a nylon guitar. So let's say nylon guitar and pad. So put this all on MIDI channel 1. And let's edit. And let's go to, so you have different arpeggiations for different instrument groups. So let's say, okay, for guitar, I wanted this to be more Latin. So let's try this arpeggiator. So now. And you can say, I just wanted to take the volume down. So of. So kind of anything that you have set up, you could just, simply just play. And then you're able to, tweak those arpeggios. So it's really sophisticated arpeggios that you could, run on each instrument and play one chord and have kind of a instant, composition without doing a lot of work or a lot of musical like keyboard ability. So I appreciate it for that. Okay. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. And once again, if you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button. So I see we're almost at 100 likes. So if we could get up there, that'd be wonderful. And again, thanks for all great questions. All right, so wonderful that Graham could join us from Royal Wootton Bassett in the UK. All right, he's already starting his weekend. Okay, so sorry, my chat field just jumped on me. We just find my space. Okay, we have a question. I add instruments and drag their windows to another monitor, but if I click outside of Cubase, all my instruments disappear until I re-click on Cubase. This was not the case before. Help. So it says in Cubase, I add instruments and drag their windows to another monitor, but if I click outside of Cubase, all my instruments... Okay, so JVI, if you could let me know if when you are clicking outside of Cubase, is that clicking on an instrument or in a different program? Because I think if it's, clicking on a different program, could be contingent. Like it could be the effect of the other program may have an effect on what components are still visible and using the screen. So if you could specify if you're clicking outside of the main Cubase project, maybe on a plugin or clicking outside of the Cubase program, that would be helpful. So. All right, so we see Norton Wade says, hi, Greg, very much grateful for the hangout. So you're welcome and glad that hopefully people can learn some tips and tricks and make some better music. Okay, so I see a question. I have a question about the new sampler track. When you work with slices, is it possible to tune each individual slice? So I think it's going to be basically the same. I don't think it's possible to tune the individual slices. Let me just take a quick look. But I think you could do it inside a Groove agent. So let's say if I just wanted to go to... So I'll create a sampler track. Let's create our slices. So when we do this... we're going to be able to, drag the particular slices, so, if I wanted to take this and drag it to our sampler track, but we can't necessarily do different editing on it. But if we want to do that, one of the tools that does that, I believe, is going to be Groove Agent. So I'm going to add a quick instrument track. Because kind of the intention of, the sampler track is one sample and to be able to build from there. But if I go to Groove Agent and then I go to my slices, each of the slices will now be mapped to their own. And at this point, since they're broken apart into their own pads as multiple files, at this point I could just go to pitch, and for this pad, pitch this up while not affecting the pitch of that. So while the sampler track doesn't do it, you could do it quite easily utilizing Groove Agent SE. All right, so I just see Sven commenting on the input order question, where I was asking him if it would, if he was using aggregate devices. So he's not using that, and it is Mac OS, and it says I refer to the order in the bus name column, which determines the order in the project input menu, and he's had this issue for quite a long time. So I just curious if you are starting with a template. Or if it's just your input settings that are very that are or if they're just constant, or if it's part of a template. And if you start Sven with the project, if you start in safe mode, if you notice any difference in the behavior, and you can do that on the Mac by holding down Command Option plus Shift after starting Cubase, and see if that makes a difference for you. Okay, so we have a question from Michael H. Is it possible to transpose the chord track up 2 octaves? I find a chord track often plays too low on a keyboard. Okay, so let me I'll just do a new project here. Again, thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, so let's say now I will add a chord track. Okay, so I will just place this track into record. All right, so some of the things that you could do is, set up voicing. So, if you, let's say if we go here to the setup voicing, we could say I wanted, to set my range. So let's say the lowest root note, let's say is C3. And we'll make this the lowest voicing range. Let's say E3. So let's see if we, so you could, and just come to the voicings and just be able to kind of set that up directly here. And you could also just choose to, so if you wanted to change, just go to the setup voicings. And you could also say, okay, I don't want 5-note chords. I don't want 4-note chords. Or, if you don't want to add the root note, you could adjust kind of the voicing parameters right there. So just on the chord track itself, just go to setup voicing, and then you could transpose the chord track. So we see a question, can musical mode be used to quantize drums? So musical mode could be used to make drums that are drifting in tempo, to make those play back in time to a steady tempo. So whether that is considered quantizing, where it's moving notes to correcting musical rhythms, so you could do that. So, definitely as soon as you put it into musical mode, that would apply for multi-tracks as well as individual files. All right. All right, so we have Barry from Trinidad and Tobago checking in. Thanks for joining us. And I also see Randy Lee. Thanks for joining. I see Garrett's comment about Trinidad and Tobago, 2 beautiful islands for the price of 1. So, okay. Okay, so we see from David Rogers. Okay, Greg, can you demonstrate Very Audio recording? So let's. So we'll show you Very Audio editing. All right, let me just see if I have. Okay, I'll just do another project here quickly. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the Very Audio functionality. All right, so one of the things that Very Audio is cool about is actually working in conjunction with the chord track in Cubase. So if I wanted to go to my piano part here, so if we look at our piano, I could, since that's selected, I go to my project and I could go to chord track and say create chord symbols. And this is going to figure out our chords for us. Now I will go to my sample editor and open up Very Audio. So we'll just look at our part here, and we could choose to now colorize based upon the chord track. So as we want to see, and what Cubase has done is an analysis of our vocal parts. And we could switch between 2 different modes. So we could say, I want to see all of my smart controls or kind of an abbreviated set of default controls. So when we do this, if we want to play and listen,
You stare at the ground, not a sound. Tell me why.
so not hateful pitch, but if we wanted to do some pitch correction. So one of the things is we could actually colorize based upon the actual chord track. So I can see green notes are within the chord, blue notes are within the scale, and red notes are out of key. Now quickly, for if you want to do like 90% of your pitch correction, you could just come here and select the event, and then if you go to the bottom center, you could go to quantize pitch, and that will just move all of the files to their pitch center. So now we can listen to it.
Stare at the ground, not a sound. Tell me why.
Now, if I wanted to do stuff like on this particular note, let's zoom in just so we could see this a little more effectively. And if I wanted to adjust the vibrato, so let's say if in this note, if I want it to be kind of more processed or robotic or auto-tuned sound,
You stare at the ground.
you could do that. And you have always unlimited levels of undo, and it's tied into your Cubase undo history. A lot of times you may find that you are going to be doing correction, but you know, if you wanted to keep transitions the same, but maybe in the middle, have the vibrato tame in the middle, we could grab these little triangle edges. And as we do that, I could say, okay, we want to keep those transitions, but I want it to regulate the main part of the word so that we can have that more natural sounding. If I go to select, we see this little diamond. We could also, where people tend maybe to drift flat or sharp going into words or out of words, I could move this diamond here and say, I just, the singer ran out of diaphragm support here, and we could bring up the pitch, but not affect before or after that particular point. So I could just rotate this diamond and say, okay, they kind of scooped into this note, but once they got into the note, everything was good. We could also, if you hold down, once you are in the corners here, if you hold down, I think it's Alt, that you could tilt notes like so. And if you wanted to very easily just adjust the volume. So while you're here, you're like, oh, this word just came out a little hot. You could adjust the volume directly right there to different notes. So you want it louder, softer. And again, if you don't like your changes, you have your undo history. That is completely adjustable. If I wanted to just say, okay, this note needs to be a little shorter, I could just change the length of notes or their start positions. I could say, okay, we wanted to take this particular note and just change it rhythmically. And just kind of change the musical phrasing of that. You could do that. If we go to the lower right-hand corner, we could go to volume, and here we could adjust formant if you need to, just on a word-by-word basis. If you go to the bottom, we could just, if you find that the segments aren't really, as accurate as you want, you could just split, and then you could treat each of these as different segments to join those particular notes. And if you go to the edge, it'll just turn into a glue gun. So if you wanted to treat that entire little phrase as one single entity, you're able to do that. If you enable, MIDI capability, you have, so you could just say, I wanted to go to my MIDI functions. You could just assign MIDI input for the particular tracks as well. But something else that's really very handy with this is I could say, I want to see my MIDI reference. I could look at my piano part and I could see the keys from the piano overlaid with the vocal. So if I wanted to just select notes, I say, okay, I want to move this to a note. So if it's red, I can see that's out of key, that's in scale, but this is the same note that the piano is hitting. And you could see that piano part as a reference underlying just by enabling that. So that's a couple of the things that you could do with Very Audio. And of course, you could, under functions, choose to convert that into MIDI information directly from your from the part into a track. And if you want to just come here to your MIDI input and say, okay, I just want to play, different notes from your MIDI keyboard to play the pitch in, you could do that just that easily. So those are some of the advantages I think that you'll see with Very Audio, just like really significant workflow improvements. And one of my favorite features is, since we have the chord track, that I could just take a little section here and I could just take a little phrase. And since we know what the chords are, I'm going to just select that particular note there and go to audio and say, okay, I want to generate, 2 harmony voices from that. And these will automatically be mapped directly to the right notes based from the chord track. So those are some of the great things that you can do with Very Audio, David. So. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. Okay, so I see a question. Anyone know how to configure Avid Control app in Cubase? So generally, I think that runs on Yukon. So go to your studio menu to Studio Setup. And when you see Add Device, you want to just add a Yukon device. And then once you have your Yukon device added, you could configure where the Yukon is being sent to. So that's really all you have to do is just to add the Yukon device right there by clicking on the plus sign. Okay, question from John Costigan. Hello, Greg. Do I have to save as an exported track in order to correctly import it into a different project? I've forgotten the best method. Thank you for all your Cubase wisdom. So you're welcome, John. Hopefully your computers and your audio interface is working well. So you don't have to save it. Really, all you have to do now since version 10 is go to Import Tracks from Project. So I could go to a different project and say, okay, I want to go to this project here. We'll add, and I can say, I want these tracks, and I could choose to include or exclude the events and parts. So if I wanted to import all the mixer settings, but not the drum parts, for instance, or all my channel and inspector settings, and I could include and exclude automation. So once again, just go to, once the project has been saved, go to Import Tracks from Project, select a project, and that could import them directly into your project. Okay, so we see, please change the symbol of pre-post fader send more recognizable from each other. So there was some changes with this depending on which version that you have. So, think of it based on colors. So if you want it to go to, pre-fader, it'll be green. And then if you get a post fader, that will be orange. And you could think pre-green, like G comes before, O in the alphabet. So, that's how I remember it. So, so when you're when you see orange, that's post fader, you could just move to pre fader. So in previous versions, there were like kind of two different shades of green. So that's one thing that has changed, is that the colors are more distinct. So kind of go by the colors and not necessarily the symbol. So remember, if you just think of the colors alphabetically, that's how, so green, that's how I remember things. So, but so the colors are kind of used as the main visual distinction between pre and post fader. Okay, so I just see from Christopher Nielsen, RevX plugins crashed my Cubase 11. I have UR44 registered and went through all the steps. How can I get these plugins to work right if I do not have the original packaging with the license key? So as long as you have the license, on, the Soft E licenser, or directly on your USB E licenser, and also depending, there was recently an update because some of the original plugins weren't working with later operating systems. So if your RevX plugin kind of doesn't look, we'll just say something, this is what the new RevX plugin kind of looks like. So it's a kind of a more contemporary operating, a more contemporary user interface, but it's also going to work better with later operating systems. So make sure that you have the latest versions of those, because the original RevX did patches to update for later operating systems. But definitely take advantage and get the latest versions, and it's a free download. You just download it and install it, and it'll activate from your license. All right, wonderful to see Steve McRae on the live stream from Atlanta. I hope you're doing well, buddy. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Wonderful keyboard player. Okay, we have a question. How do I add different audio inserts to MIDI tracks that are connected to one instance of Hallian Sonic? Okay, so let's say if I have, okay, so I'm going to add an instrument track of Hallian Sonic SE. Okay, so let's say I have a Rhodes patch here. And I wanted to have let's say a piano sound here. Or let's make it a more traditional piano. Okay, so when we do this, if we go to Hallian Sonic SE, there could be 16 outputs. So right now, when we look at our mix console, I could see, let's say when I play this or play the Silk Roads, that they're both going out of this audio channel. If I wanted those to have independent effects and processing capabilities, what I need to do is just go to the mixer, and I can say we want to have the Rhodes going out of the first output. Then I'm going to enable a second output, and we see that's automatically added, and we see it as slot 1. So now when I play the piano, this is going out of output. I'll make that the main. So the piano will go out of output 2. So now I play the piano. I play the Rhodes, so the piano's going out of this output. The Rhodes is going out of that output. So if I wanted to put different effects on those particular channels, all I have to do is say, okay, on my Rhodes, or I'll put on my piano, I'm going to put a weird delay. So now as I play the piano part, I will just come right over here, and my piano will have the delay. But now when I hit my Rhodes, so I still hear the delay in the piano, but that insert isn't on, isn't on that particular output. So just, come here and you could have, 16 stereo outputs, so that you can have independent processing for plugins and EQs. Okay, wonderful to see Mike Bello from Melbourne, Australia. We know it's like really late there, so thank you for joining us. I see Gareth is saying Melbourne's one of the best cities in the world. So yeah, I have a dear friend who lives outside of Wangaratta that I got to visit when I was in Australia, I think late 2004. So wonderful trip. Okay, reading through questions. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. What is the fastest way to open the Retrolog window if you return to the Retrolog track? Okay, so let's say I'm here. Okay, so here we have our Hallian Sonic SE. So one of the things that I did is, if you go to the track here, you could click on this icon for edit instrument. So you can edit the instrument track, and that's pretty easy. What I've also added, and I don't think that this is on by default, is if you right click on the instrument track and go to track control settings, you'll see this little thing that is, you'll see hidden controls and visible controls. And I believe that the edit instrument is under hidden controls. So I like to move that. And I did this just recently because I kept making like a learned mistake over and over again. It was annoying me. So I selected the edit instrument. I click add. And then you could actually, so we could see that this will show up. And if you wanted to actually move that up or down, you could adjust its position so that now when you come over here, you could just select the track and that will open up the particular instrument. And I believe that there's also a key command that I always forget. Let's see if I could learn it along with everyone else. Let's see if there's a default. So I may have set this, but there is an edit VST instrument command. So that looks like maybe one that I would add. So I could just come here and hit that key command and open up the VST instrument as well. Okay, so we see from our color discussion at Jazz Dudes added a color template info in the Discord. So thanks for doing that, Jazz Dude. Okay, so we see, sir, how to convert MIDI track to audio tracks using audio mixdown. So we could definitely do that as well. So let's say if I wanted to take this piano part. And so when we play this. So if I wanted to do that, I could, if I don't want to use the render in place, I could go to export audio mixdown. I could do single, and I'm just going to choose the grand. So what I'm going to do is right, and then I'm going to choose to create an audio track. Let's add it to the queue, and I'm going to just make sure I'm going to set my left and right locators here. So I'm going to hit P so that this will start exporting from the beginning to the end. So export audio mixdown. So we have the grand selected, and I'm going to just come over here, and instead of an MP3, I'm going to do it as a WAV file, let's say 24-bit, and we'll create an audio track, and I'll just start the queue export. So once this is exported with just that audio selected, it's going to place it at the bottom of an audio track. Okay, and now we come here, and this is our mix down of our piano. All right, so that's all you have to do. Once again, file, export audio mix down, choose the source, and under after export, just choose create audio file. Okay, so a question from Steve McGray. In lo-fi chill music, yes, I know. There may be 3 bars of 4/4, then 1 bar that's extended, i.e. 15/16 of a 4/4 bar. How could you do something like this in Cubase 10.5? Okay, so if you need to, so let's say we'll come, let's do a new project here. So, and let's just add a signature track. So let's say, okay, we have 4/4, and I'm going to switch this to bars and beats. And we'll say starting at measure 1, and I needed to do at measure 4. Sorry, let me just... So you could do stuff like this and say, okay, and now at this bar, I want it to go back to 4/4. And if you, at this point, want to just, repeat this, you could just duplicate that same kind of, same pattern of your time signatures, just like that. So add a signature track and just kind of click, by default, it will go to 4/4, but you could type in, I need this to be 9/8, I need this to be, 12/16. So at that point, you could just have your multiple time signatures kind of wherever you need. So. Okay, so we have Nanook Brassers from Netherlands. So thanks for joining us. All right, so we see that Gareth is probably making pizza for his family. That's how tight a community you are. We know what Gareth has for dinner on Fridays. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Could you show an example of a voiceover line replacement that matches the cadence and performance of the original line? I'm using the current version of Nuendo. All right, so I'll open up Nuendo again quickly here. So I think I have an example of this that might be helpful. And this may be weird because I think it's my voice that I did 2 different recordings of. All right, so let's say we have 2 different sources. I'll go ahead and play this back and just said this is just a recording of my voice I did. So if we want it as the most advanced audio post-production solution available, Nuendo is the choice of film, TV, game audio, and immersive sound industry professionals worldwide. And let's say we have another recording that's going to be slightly similar, but maybe a different cadence to it. As the most advanced audio post-production solution available, Nuendo is the choice. If we play both of them together, TV, game audio, and immersive sound industry professionals worldwide. So if I wanted those 2 to line up, because it was kind of critical for a picture, maybe this was a bad recording and one was the overdub, I could go to the audio alignment panel and I will say, select this and say, okay, we're going to add that as the reference, and I want this to be the target. So the reference is the original file, and then I could just say align audio. And now as we play, as the most advanced audio post-production solution available, Nuendo is the choice of film, TV, game audio, and immersive sound industry professionals worldwide. So even though the pitch is slightly different, the rhythmic timing will be just kind of matched. So again, you could just see that directly from here, from Align Audio, and I think you could access it directly from the audio menu as well, where you could just see, I think it's going to be under Align Audio, or maybe So, but just accessing directly right from there. So, but yeah, it's a wonderful feature for doing post production and solving those kind of age old dilemmas. Okay, so I just see question from Kai: is that free with Cubase? So if you could ask Kai what is free with Cubase, that would be helpful. Sometimes it's a while before I get to the question, so I don't know for sure if it's what particular thing it is. So okay, so I see it's probably with the voice designer, so that it is free with Nuendo, and there is a Nuendo promotion going on. I think you could actually, if you upgrade from Cubase to Nuendo, I think it's 40% off currently. So that's a wonderful thing to get into. So. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions. And I think my chat field's about ready to. Okay, so I just see, hi Greg, I do a lot of editing in a key editor. Would you be able to show any workflow shortcuts you may know of? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. So there's a lot of cool things we could do in the key editor. So we just jump back to this project. Okay, so let's say like, something that you could do pretty easily, just, piano stuff. So some of the things I like to do in a key editor that may not be so apparent, taking notes, you can use the arrow keys to move up and down selected notes, but if you hold down the shift key, you can knock that up and down an octave. So I like doing that stuff a lot. I do lots of, like when I used to do more MIDI work, I haven't had a chance to do projects recently, just the current life situations and stuff. But, I was always the king of taking MIDI parts and, okay, I'm going to, add this voice, double it down an octave, being able to see multiple parts. So if I want to say, okay, I want to see the piano and the guitar simultaneously, I could select these two parts and go directly into the key editor. And you could edit those two parts. And sometimes you look at it and it's like, oh, which part is which. You could choose to just, look at the particular guitars, but you could also colorize these based on part. So now when I do this, I could see that the orange would be the piano and the green will be guitar. And I could just come right over here and now I could edit the guitar. So, being able to kind of see multiple parts, and I see many composers, and their whole thing now is, in talking to composers, they go, this is, the 21st century score. And they just, when they play back their composition, they just select all the tracks and look at it in the key editor. And when you look at like a Bach piece, that's like, it's really interesting to be able, because you'll see like really interesting like visual patterns that for musical patterns. So it gets to be just kind of a different way of looking at data. Some things that a lot of people miss also is being able to, if I wanted to take notes and maybe have them hold until the next note starts, if you go to the length, you could choose to, just apply legato, and that could hold the next note until the next note starts. And that could be super helpful. Being able to, velocity control is really critical for a lot of components. And if you look at a chord, let's say if we have, multiple notes here that are all like, occurring on the same beat, if you hold down Alt or your Control or Command plus Shift, you could adjust the velocity of like just like an individual note without affecting the other notes on the chord. Being able to take, these notes here and elongate all of the notes, stuff like that is helpful. If I wanted to take, let's say, just take these notes over here and I'll enlarge this part, some of the things that can be really cool, is like if we just, you could select the notes kind of like so. So if you wanted to cycle through notes, but if you hold down the Shift key, you could select notes. And if you hold down like Alt or I think Control, you could move the notes. And that's based on the snap value. And if you hold down Alt or Option, let me just select this if I remember what the keyboard shortcut is. So then you could change the length of notes. So just hitting the left and right arrows with the Alt or Option key. Dealing with velocity is so critical. So being able to come here and keep your velocity scale, or to be able to keep your velocity scale and tilt like so, or to kind of compress your velocities. Those are, if you go to the center, we could compress or expand the difference in the velocity values. And, as you're playing, one thing that a lot of people miss is, let's say I'm playing,
Can I see what you
often you could just actually record, by hitting the keys on the MIDI keyboard if you wanted to. So, and, new things like scale correction. So like, I think the first question we had today is, I only want to see the notes that are in the key of the song, which is in the key of G. So I could only draw notes in, or I only want to see notes within that particular scale. So I know that any note that those notes will work musically. So at that point, that it's going to be within the key. And if you have a chord track, you could also colorize based on scales and chords. So as we move notes, you could say, okay, a red note is out of key, a green note, is within the chord. So you're able to do stuff like that as well. So those are a couple little cool things you could do in the MIDI key editor, and there's like 1,000 others as well. Okay, so Michael Teams wants everyone to whack the like button and to shake your booty. So, and Filter Freak wants people to hit the like button as well. Okay. Okay, so I just see a question. Is it possible to use samples from VST sound packs in third-party plugins? I tried to plop some drum sounds from the Lo-Fi pack into Break Tweaker, and it did not take them. So there may be some, it may be kind of tied to Cubase use. So, but what you could do if you drop it into the project window, bounce in place, and then drop it into another plugin, that would probably maybe get you around some stuff, but I didn't tell you that officially. Okay, so question, is there any way to automate that the sustain pedal starts 1/16th note after bar start and end 1/16th before bar ends? And that then for numerous bars. Okay, so let's say if we have sustain pedal, might be able to do this in the logical editor. So all right, so I'll come over here to sustain. So let's say I have sustain. Okay, so let's see if we could do it in logical editor quickly. Okay, so we want to take type is equal to controller. Value 1 is going to be 64. Okay, so let's say if we can set position to set to fixed value. All right. So let's try a value inside the range. Okay, inside bar range. So you may be able to do something like this where you could say it's only going to be so I could play with it a little more if you want to email me, JVI at clubcubase@steinberg.de. But I think we could probably just, have, or maybe just choose to, let's see if we can insert. So we could kind of set the the bar range here. So I may be able to do something in a logical editor for that. But if you want to email me, I could play around with it over the weekend instead of you watch me learn how bad my thought process is live in front of hundreds of people. But email me over the weekend. I think we could do something like this where you could say, okay, we want to either insert the pedals, and sometimes, in the old days, we used to be able to quantize, like in the Atari days, we could quantize controllers. But let me just, so I'll play around with it if you want to email me to clubcubase@steinberg.de, but I think we could do it with a logical editor, or we could give it a good shot, so. Okay, reading through different comments. Okay, so we see from Mike Bello says two key editor shortcuts I would love to know in particular are key commands for switching active parts and fastest way to duplicate if there's a range selection tool, and a key editor for easy duplicating. Okay, so if we have multiple parts selected, like we were just showing, like let's say with our different instruments here. So if it's kind of edit active part, so the key command, and I think I may have set one up a long time ago. So let's say, okay, so let's say if I just wanted to come here and let's assign. Okay, so now if I wanted to switch between the grand, the bass, and acoustic guitar, I think I could just come here. Okay. Okay, so that turns that on and off, but let's switch between. So I think if we do this, so, but let me just, I know I've done this before, so I know it's in the, all right, I'm just going to try this key command again. See. All right, so that turns it on and off. But there is a key command for this. Let me just. Just make sure I have the right key command. All right, I'll just try this one. Yeah. Okay, so that's the one. Okay, so come over here to the key commands. And it's activate previous part. So try that. And you could cycle back and forth between them. Now, if you're in the MIDI editor, and I think we'll maybe see this coming in the future. I know I've asked for it many times. of being able to duplicate just a particular part and without a range selection tool. So I will come here, just let me switch this to bars and beats. Okay, so let's say I have one measure of data. And then when we look at this data, that it doesn't start exactly on the beginning of the event or end on the beginning. So what happens is if we duplicate this track, it's basically going to duplicate right after the event. So if you wanted to use the range selection tool, you could go to the in place editor, and that's just Command or Control plus Shift I. And now we could see this this editor part directly. So let's say this is what our part looks like. I could select these events with the range tool and then just hit Control or Command D. And that will keep the space, and you could select that range of one measure and duplicate. So I know it's a workaround, but it still functions, and you can do it from the in-place editor, Mike. All right, so we have Brian checking in from Crystal Coast, North Carolina. Thanks for joining us. And Millard Brown made it from Pennsylvania. Okay, so we have, hi Greg, I have 2 projects with audio files with the same name and number. Can I import and merge into one project without any worry? Does this override or replace the files with the same name? So if they're, you probably don't, they're probably going to be the same names, but in different folders. I assume if they're in different projects, because obviously you can't have 2 files with the same name in the same location. So as long as they're in different folders before you import them, it's not going to be a problem to import. So you could still have the same name, but it's really just making sure that you had the same path between them. So that's something that, just make sure that they're not in the same folder. But I assume they're not in the same folder, or you wouldn't have 2 files with the same name in the same folder. So, but it's not a problem as long as they're in different folders. So what you could do is maybe try to rename the files before importing it, just so you know, because it could be confusing later. It's like, every track has the same name. If you just put, just add the initial to each of the audio file names, that could save you a lot of hassle. Just to keep your, it could be confusing later. So. Okay. All right. So I see I misunderstood Daryl's question. So it says, all right. So it says not the correct MIDI question. So it says studio setup. This is for Daryl from his previous question, where you rename controllers. So studio setup, and let's say generic remote. MIDI input not connected. Then control name untitled. Okay, so let's say if I just come here. Okay, so it just says, okay, so it's just saying, so studio setup, add device, generic remote, MIDI input, not connected, then control name, untitled. So, so I think, just double clicking here, How do we change the name from Untitled to what we want? All right, so I'm just going to add a brand new one instead of using an existing one. So I'll just add a generic remote. Okay, so we have this set to not connected. Then control name Untitled. So if we change it in the top, then it will change in the bottom, but you may not be able to change it in the bottom because these two will be linked. And then when you click here again, then that name that you just entered here will be reflected there. So give that a try. So try double clicking at the top, and then you may have to click twice here, and then the name that you type in at the top is reflected there and in the bottom. Let me know if I misunderstood yet again. All right. Okay, sorry, my chat field just jumped on me. See how we're doing on time? Wow, this time is flying today. All right. So question, I know it's stupid, but in Halligan 6, if I send anything to A2 or A3 or anything other than A1, I don't hear anything at all. How do I remedy this? So it could be that so let's say if we add an instrument track and we're going to add Halligan. Okay, so this channel is on channel 1. So let's say, okay, I add this channel. So I have a string machine. And now, and if I could trigger this from the keys, but let's add maybe a synth pad for channel 2. So, all right. So is now when I go to play, it's going to play back the string pad until I switch this to channel 2, then it's going to play back the allure. So make sure that you have this particular channel where the MIDI keyboard is being routed to set to the correct MIDI channel. And then I think you should hear it JVI. All right, we see from Clifford. Thanks, Greg. You answered my question, really helped. So thanks. Glad it helped. Okay, how can I add 3/4 loops in Groove Agent? So I'm not sure if there's a lot of 3/4 loops that are there, but if you wanted to search, some of the different libraries would probably have it. So let's take a look. I'll add a Groove Agent. Let's do Groove Agent SE. Okay, and I will load up a quick kit here. Okay, so I'm going to I'll look for styles. And so I see this little arrow here, this little folder. So turn that on. You could go to styles and then just look for different time signatures. So here's a jazz waltz. So now I could enter that in. So, and you could see the different time signatures. So as soon as we come over here, so if you just go to musical, and then you could see signature, and then you could search by meter directly there. So then if you have 3/4 patterns, you could say, okay, I'm looking for 3/4 or 6/8. Okay, we have a question. Is there a quick way to select all MIDI notes and set them to the same velocity? All right, so let's look. So if I want all these notes to be set to the same velocity, I think you go to MIDI, to functions, and fixed velocity. And you could just adjust it like that. You could also go to the logical editor. And let's say I wanted to take type is equal to note value 2, which is velocity note message. We want to I think we could do a fixed value. Okay, so let's say we'll make velocity 44. All right, and I'll transform. All right, so we want to transform nodes. Okay, so I'm going to say, I think I could even just say value 2 is equal to, let's say inside range 0 to 127. We'll take value 2. And let's set to fixed value of 44. And now I could just, and you'll just see whatever velocity value is you could have set there. And I think the first velocity value, the fixed velocity, is just set by the default velocity value. So you could always go to MIDI, to functions, to velocity. And if you wanted to add, subtract, compress, or limit, you could just choose other options there as well. Okay, just reading through some more questions here. Okay, so we see Jeff Sabelski saying the flex razor is very cool, so it's a lot of fun to get into it. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Is there an option in the project setup that allows me not to have dropouts whenever music is playing at the same time I'm loading a VST? So generally why it drops out, it's not necessarily a dropout, but what it's doing, it's recalculating all of the delay compensation. So at that point, some programs will play back the audio out of time until you hit stop, and then it recalculates the delay compensation. So Cubase is just doing that quickly while it's playing. So I know that, that the Steinberg team is aware of that, and that people want it to be kind of a gapless audio engine, which, so I know that they're aware of that request, but there isn't a setting to have that work in a gapless function currently. Okay, so we have a question. If I get the new Steinberg M guitar, will I get a discount if I own Absolute 4? Currently, no. It's a brand new product, and they're independent. They're independent products, so, we don't have M guitar as a part of Absolute 4. So, it's brand new. I think it's a wonderful sounding guitar. I'm looking to kind of jump into it this weekend myself. I see Sven will email me about the input order question, so thank you, Sven. All right, I know we had some questions that were mailed in. Let's get to some of those. Okay, so this is a question from Jan. It says, how to move cursor in a MIDI that has a long name. When I edit MIDI in the editor, I find it impossible or nearly difficult to set the cursor if the MIDI has a long name. The MIDI name text prevents under cursor position. The same problem shows up when set cursor to start name text block. Is there a command to set the cursor to the beginning of the MIDI in the MIDI editor? Very best, Jan. So what we could do if you run into this, we kind of had this come up in the last live stream, is let's say our MIDI part, and Jan was kind enough to send a screenshot, and he had a really long name for his MIDI event, something like this. So when we have a small selection, let's say a couple measures, and I go into the MIDI editor, that it could look kind of something like this. And you go, oh, how do I get underneath? And I'm moving the name, which is in fact moving the boundaries for the particular notes. So what you could do if you wanted to temporarily hide the long names, you'll see this little icon here of show part borders. And once you hit that, then the names will disappear and you could, freely edit. And this works in the sample editor as well as the MIDI key editor. Okay, so we had a question mailed in. Is it possible to change the time base for several tracks at the same time? For example, tracks in project all to be switched from linear to musical time base. Thanks in advance for your answer. Regards from Germany, and it's from Hajo Hertz. So let's take a look and show you how we could do that. All right, so I will just do a new project. And let's add 8 audio tracks. And these are all set to musical time base. So, and I think if we go to your project logical editor, that there's even a preset for this. So let's say it's under tracks. So I think we could toggle time domain for selected tracks. So if I wanted to go there, we could toggle the time domain, and let's look at that. So you could set it to specific values. So we could say, okay, I want to take the tracks, and we could say if they're selected or not. And the track operation, we'll choose time domain, and then we could say set it to musical, set it to linear. So right now, if I want to take all those tracks and set it to musical mode, they're all in linear. I could hit apply, and it'll go. If half of them are in linear and half are in musical mode, and we want it to toggle, you could hit toggle, and that will just simply go back and forth. So in the project logical editor found in the project menu, go to media type is equal to audio, and you can do this for MIDI as well. Under action target, you want to say track operation. You want to say operation is time domain, and you could switch to musical, switch to linear, or toggle but to the other status of whatever isn't currently selected. Okay, so we have a question. I think I may have missed this from the last live stream from Rob H. It says, when punching in and out guitars, should I split the mistakes in the audio, then record the punch in, or should I just record overlap everything recorded area and the new take will be in front? When happy with the take, should I bounce the track? So let's say if we're doing punches. All right, so I'll just set up a quick range to do a punch here. Okay, so if I'm doing like an audio punch, so let's say at this point I'm gonna hit play and then hit I and O, or enable the punch in, punch out from just to the left of the transport here. So now when I play, it'll just punch in, punch out. Now, if I wanted to punch in just a little section, let's say there's a mistake here. There's no need to really erase the parts. You could. It's unnecessary, I think. But you could, at this point, because a lot of times when you're recording people and you're doing a lot of punching, it could be that, the requirements could be a little fickle and people could change their mind. Oh, go back to the first one from, 23 minutes ago. And to have that take. So I wouldn't necessarily delete it, and I would just set up the punch, and it's going to go directly over that little area and say, okay, they need to do a punch in again of that area. All right, and let's say we do one more punch, and I'll just set this like just a little tiny punch point here. I'll turn off my snap. All right, and say we had to do a punch of like one small note. So as we do our punch in, now one of the things that you could do, so we see these little kind of lines that are these diagonal lines indicating that there's events underneath. And if you wanted to select those events without having to go into lanes, you could just go to the bottom center and you could see the events there that you want to toggle between. And one other thing, if you wanted to get rid of it, like as you're doing punches, and if you don't want that behavior, go to preferences to editing and choose delete overlaps. And let's see how this functions in a punch. So let's say if I want to do a quick punch right here. So we see where all the punches are, we get these diagonal lines. So I'll hit play. And now that we punched, let me just set my point here. So I'll set my left and right locator. Now I'll play and we'll do a punch in. And so, but all the events are there. So I wouldn't worry about cleaning up the underlying stuff. I would just, simply come, and keep all the events. And if you wanted to clean it up after, go to audio, to advanced. I think if we choose delete overlaps, then all the files will get deleted underneath. And if you did want to say, okay, I've carefully got everything here, I would just go, if you wanted to consolidate everything, just do a bounce selection and replace the events. Okay, and we also had this, I think this was mailed in last for Tuesday's live stream from Pylon Records. I think it's from Peter. Can you please provide some workaround for MIDI latency that one gets from using USB MIDI interface? We are not using any VST instruments or any plugins or effects, no audio out or in from Cubase, just straight up MIDI programming with external gear. I'm using powered USB hub. Nothing is daisy chained. 8 MIDI gear connected to the Edirol and 4 gear connected via USB. None of the gear is running any sequencer, just straight up old school MIDI note sequencing. All the gear is connected to external mixers, so analog monitoring. MIDI notes gets recorded pretty good, no issues there. It just when I play back, every part's we as we build the song, we start hearing the drifts. We don't want to do anything with audio recording in Cubase, which I know fixed a problem, but that is just another way of working. On Mac, Mojave, Cubase 10.5 using Roland Edirol USB MIDI interface. Do we go and adjust delay in every MIDI channel in Cubase? Does lower the buffer size from 256 to 32 help with MIDI playback? Also, is there a way to mathematically measure how many milliseconds each MIDI track is off to increase or decrease that track? iConnectivity USB MIDI face seems to be a lot of work to set up based on research on forums. The software that comes with it's not very reliable. So a lot of my friends are using, I remember even being at BT's studio a couple years ago, and he had a number of the iConnectivities set up, and he was liked them quite a bit, and he had a pretty extensive MIDI rig. So, what I would consider doing is, for MIDI parts. So let's say if I have just a really quick MIDI part here. So I think I might even have something here. So, if I have, let's say, just a quick MIDI part that is, something very rhythmic. So let's say I have just a kick, and we have this with so just so let's see if I adjust the playback. The time delay here. So say, so you may find that different instruments are going to respond differently. And as we kind of work with this, I would maybe, try to set up a track delay. And, if you wanted to, you could actually, maybe record the output and compare that with the distance, between, let's say, a rendered click track. So if I wanted to come here, go to my project window and go to my signature track, and I'll say, okay, let's render audio click between. So we can know that the audio click is going to be sample accurate. And then take, just do a little test of just quarter notes and record that and see exactly how off that is. And then you could adjust the milliseconds for each of the MIDI tracks here. And as you move this value, that delay time is going to be in milliseconds. So you could have those tracks ahead. And sometimes, old MIDI stuff was always a little bit out of time, but we've gotten very precise with it with virtual instruments because they are sample accurate. I remember in the old days, doing comparisons for people where we just take, VST instruments, MIDI timing, and compare it to any virtual, and any VST instrument compared to any external device, and the timing was just obvious once you set it up. But you can, once you kind of find that connection, you build a template, and every time you add this instrument that this delay should be associated with that instrument using that MIDI interface. I think that's probably the best way. So it'll be a sucky day of figuring that out, and that's wonderful use of interns. But once you have that calculated, I think you could get everything to be much tighter rhythmic feel. Okay, so we just had a question that came in right before the live stream. It says, I use NI Machine 2.13 software as a VST in my Cubase 11 Pro. I set Cubase to repeat a loop of one bar. Machine software listens to Cubase and loops the same bar. I cut MIDI notes in every beat of every bar inside machine software. The problem, my machine software does not trigger the first note of the loop. The MIDI, the note which sits next to the left locator. Quantize and grid lock are set to on both Cubase and machine, so that note does not extend before the beginning of the loop. In Cubase, the loop starts exactly at the beginning of the bar, not later. Quantize and grid lock is on. Is this a Cubase problem or machine software problem? I just bought a new machine, Mark III, and if it cannot use the SEP sequencer to insert MIDI notes in the flying Cubase, I think I will have to send it back and ask for a refund. I recorded a video and I reviewed a video. Thank you for sending that. Please listen with sound and notice that the MIDI note produced no sound when placed next to the left locator, although it's inside the loop. Question is, does Cubase skip an internal bug the first milliseconds of the loop? Does machine play needle, does not notice the start of the MIDI note, or does machine software push the MIDI note to a position before the start of the loop / bar where the Cubase loop starts? I hope I could get an answer soon enough, so in case the problem cannot be solved, I can be able to send a machine Mark III back and ask for a refund. Thanks. So I did some Googling on this and reading through some of the NI forums. One thing that people had suggested was, and many other people have run across this in many other programs, and if you wanted to test, the easiest way to test something, is just to take, substitute the instrument. So it's like, just the control. And like, here when I have, just, if we look at this in our drum editor, I will have 4, just every downbeat. And I'm going to set the, I'll just revert this quickly. But, as Cubase plays back other virtual instruments, there's no timing problems with that. So as soon as I come here, we look at this part, it's going to just loop as expected. So I come. So as we put on our 1 measure loop, we look at the drum editor. When we go to, edit, the instrument itself, let's say I'll just bring this down. There's no issue with Cubase looping. So one thing that people had mentioned as a potential solution was in Machine, and I don't have Machine, I'm not that familiar with it, is to enable MIDI trigger in Machine. So I would give that a try, but a lot of things that are kind of externally synchronizing, and sometimes, I've seen a lot of products that don't do that correctly when they have to turn around quickly. But if you take just, 4 notes and you put in a loop in Cubase, that's the timing engine is sample accurate, and how the instrument deals with that, is kind of up to how the instrument is handling it. All right, so let's take a quick look. I think we're just about out of time. So let's see if there's one last minute question. All right, so we see Gareth is heading to bed. All right, so I think we're just about out of time. With that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Remember, next Friday, we'll do for the last 2 hours, we'll do the Zoom meetup. And if you haven't done that and you want to just kind of meet some of the other people, I know people have done collaborative projects and gotten to be quite friendly, and, making new friends in different parts of the world and people experiencing same things. I think it's a really great. I look forward to it every month, of being able to talk to everyone. So if you get a chance, you could send me an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. We will be doing the next live stream on Tuesday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. Send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And we will also should have the index updated in a few hours. I'll take a dinner break and go back and rewatch the whole live stream again and do the index of the topics covered with the live stream. I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions, and we'll see everyone on Tuesday. Take care.